Thank God we have such beautiful volunteers to help us with all of this. And we have I want to give them all a hand. I want to thank our tech crew. And I want you to know who those people are. They are Josh Schreiber, Dave Friedman. We have Joel Cowan, who is helping us on camera. We have the incomparable Mary Brogdon. Yeah. And as you know, we have been shushing the live stream, and so hopefully this morning you feel like you're in the room with us. And so I'm grateful for the tech team for that. And if you don't know, my name is Reverend Alice Reid, and I'm the spiritual director here at Centers for Spiritual Living. And I'm really excited for us to be here today to start off June. And so let's start off with our greeting that we learned last year. Grand Rising. Grand Rising. Yeah, it's a grand day to be rising. It's a grand day to be together. I know that June is this beautiful month of, as I love what Reverend Carla said about everything blossoming and being in living color. And that reference to living color and this theme that we're talking about all month in June is really looking at the wide variety and diversity of life and bringing it together through this idea of oneness so that we move through diversity into oneness. And so as we enter this sacred space of Pride Month, I want to invite you to join me to not just celebrate identity, but to elevate consciousness around this idea of Pride Month and diversity. And I think that sometimes when we move into this topic of diversity from a teaching that is so steeped in oneness that it can be a little confounding to people. Because we're talking about diversity, and then we're also talking about being one. And so how do we connect those two ideas? How do we connect these ideas of diversity and the blessing of belonging and inclusion and bring that together with oneness? And like many of you, I sometimes struggle with those ideas because in my dualistic thinking, they feel separate. Anybody with me? Right, they feel a little separate. And yet, I celebrate the authentic expression of all life. I celebrate the expression of my queer and non-binary and trans family and friends, and I lift them up. I love them. I support them in their authenticity of expression. Yeah. And the courage that it takes in a culture that still sometimes struggles with this idea of trying to make a white, heterosexual relationship with life and try to normalize that. I mean, our society is still trying to do that in many corners. And yet, we know that life, just like the flowers in the garden and all of nature, life shows up in so many unique and beautiful ways. And so in this month of Pride Month, and of course we have Juneteenth on June 19th, which is now a federal holiday still, absolutely celebrating freedom, we're going to be looking at this topic of in living color. I'm reminded of what comes to mind for me immediately is that Wizard of Oz movie where it starts in sepia and black and white, and then suddenly everything comes into view, and it's clear, and it's beautiful, and it's full of color. And so as we look at this topic this month, I am looking at how we can look at it through the lens of principle. Through the lens of principle. What I can say is that we've come a long way, and we still have some miles to travel to really move into this place of full acceptance. And so that's sort of the underpinning of looking at how Science of Mind looks at diversity and oneness and brings them together. I'm also looking at the teaching of, many of you might be familiar with David R. Hawkins. He wrote this great book, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender, and he created this map of consciousness. And he tried to give it measurements. And he starts with -20, and he tops out the chart with plus 700. So he's just giving it, so if you just use your mind's eye to imagine a chart, and then all these different emotional levels that we move through to evolve, to grow our consciousness, to have a greater expansion of our beingness. And one of the places I want to focus on in that chart that he does, and you can find this online in your leisure. We've come a long way, baby, with our tech, but I couldn't bring the chart up for you today. If you can find the charts online, and I want to focus on the place in the chart where David Hawkins talks about how we move through different emotional levels, and we move from pride to acceptance. Pride to acceptance. And it is in that movement or that evolution of our relationship with diversity and coming in through diversity into oneness that we begin to spiritualize our relationship with diversity. In the Science of Mind, we have this wonderful sacred affirmation. You might recognize it. There is one life. That life is God. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. And that tells us, that reminds us that life is the universal presence of creation that is everywhere. And it is not limited by form. It is not limited by race. It is not limited by gender. It is not limited by any sexual orientation. It is not limited by gender orientation. It is not limited by any belief. But it filters itself through us. And so it takes on the different shades and colors of our consciousness, of our reality, of our beliefs, of the way we see the world. And the beauty of all of that is that we are never limited by a prior belief. We can always expand those beliefs. We can always open ourselves to a greater understanding of how we want to experience the world. And we remember that even though life shows up in so many delicious sizes and colors and ways, even though it shows up in different ways, even though you can look at your neighbor and unless you're identical twins, you're different, right? You look different than the person sitting next to you. So even though God chooses to show up in these each individuated, amazing ways, all of it is grounded in unity. It all comes from the same place. It all comes from that point of creation that we're all working with. And so our human experience is one of spiritual growth, where we are moving into and living into a broader and more evolved consciousness with our relationship with life. You tracking with me? Yeah. And so in David Hawkins' chart, he has, and I remember I shared those numbers with you, -20 to 700 plus. He has pride at level 175. And what's interesting is that level is just above shame and guilt and apathy and grief and fear. And then you have pride. And the powerful thing about pride is that, especially for marginalized individuals and communities, it is this powerful reclamation of dignity. And it's necessary to rise up and to claim our authentic selves, however we show up. We need pride for that. We need pride to reclaim ourselves and to recognize the power and the bounty of our individualness. Too many syllables. And for the LGBTQ plus people and many others, pride has been a spiritual act of survival. It has been necessary to take pride in something that was deemed different, was deemed not normal. And so we celebrate the unique and authentic expression of our queer brothers and sisters. And we know that pride is important because it breaks the chain of shame. It breaks the chains of shame. It lifts people out of those lower energies of denial and internalized unworthiness. Notice what I said, internalized unworthiness, because it's not just people seeing and not accepting differences. That gets internalized by individuals who are deemed different. And so pride is important to break the chains of that so that they can be lifted above of it. And when Hawkins talks about pride, he also talks about some of its limits. Sometimes pride attaches itself to our identity at the level of ego. And sometimes when we're working with the energy of pride, we resist being challenged. And we can become defensive or exclusive. You know, this is mine. Pride says, see me. And when we up-level our consciousness, when we move to those next stages on Hawkins' chart and move up to acceptance, acceptance says, I see you, and I see everyone. I see you, and I see everyone. And so Hawkins gauges acceptance at level 350, halfway up the scale. And it is in that transitional space when we begin to really open up our consciousness to a greater expansive relationship with life. And it's not the same as acquiescence, and it's not the same as resignation. It is a deep acceptance of all life, regardless of how it shows up, or because of the way it shows up, actually. Not regardless, because of the way it shows up. And that's how we can move through diversity into this sense of oneness. Everyone, everywhere, is on their own path of becoming, of expressing their authenticity. We all, and sometimes we're really in our bodies and in our worthiness and in our celebration of ourselves, and sometimes we fall back into those places of shame and blame and guilt. And we need pride to help pick us up and give us the energy to bring us back up to that place of open consciousness, of acceptance. And when we're in acceptance, we stop needing to prove our worthiness. We've recognized the beauty of all paths, not just our own. We move beyond the fight into inner peace and outer inclusion. In Science of Mind terms, acceptance is the unfolding of the realization of oneness in form. And it allows us to celebrate diversity without separation, without the dualistic approach to life. We can see differences. We can see color. We can see different orientations. We can see different gender orientation. And we don't see ourselves as separate. No, we just see a different individualization of the unification of God as it expresses itself through life in so many amazing ways. I mean, think about nature. Like, you know, the birds don't say, ew, you're an oak tree. I'm not an oak tree. I'm not going to hang out with you. No, the nature demonstrates for us how everything can work together in such beautiful collaboration, integration, knowing that everything is interdependent with everything else. We as human beings are interdependent on each other. Ernest Holmes has this great quote: "We are not bound by any mistake we have made unless we continue to think the same thought." We're not bound by any mistake we have made unless we continue to think the same thought. In this teaching, we can always think a new thought. We can always grow. We can always evolve our own consciousness to find that place where we are God in expression at our most authentic level. if we think of life as spiritual, of a spiral of awakening, and we overlay that with Hawkins' chart of different emotions that we move through to open up to greater spiritual awakening. This map of consciousness then looks at these different levels. He has fear at the bottom, which isolates us, shame, which hides us, pride, which reveals us, and then acceptance, which integrates us. So acceptance is the key. It really brings us to a place of truly responding with love and loving all the different expressions that we see on the planet and all the different expressions we see in our culture. And this spiral reflects both our personal healing and our global healing. And for those who have felt excluded, especially queer people of faith, the message today is you are not only included in the divine plan, you are essential to it. Because without our differences, without the richness of life, we can't evolve. We can't grow without all the amazing different ways that we can see life through our own individuated thinking and through the ideas that we hold together, like this principle of oneness. And so I came across this story that I want to share with you that I thought was really moving. Years ago, at a large interfaith conference, a surprising thing happened. There were 2 choirs that were invited to sing at this interfaith conference, and one was a conservative Christian church choir from the South, and the other was a predominantly LGBTQ plus affirming church in San Francisco. Yeah, they did not know each other. They had different theology. They had different worldviews. They had different musical styles. And frankly, they didn't even want to share the same stage together. But the event planner, led by a spiritually bold organizer, made an unusual request. They asked them to perform together. And they asked them to do one song in one shared voice. Well, at first everybody refused. Like, that's impossible. We can't do that. They had their reasons: pride, doctrine, discomfort, fear. But eventually, through deep dialogue and some prayer, something shifted, and they agreed reluctantly to try. The first rehearsals were really hard. The language was careful, the energy was tense, people were kind of walking on eggshells trying to find their way. There was obvious silent judgments on both sides. But something broke open, something shifted, and in the final rehearsal they chose to sing the old spiritual, "I Need You to Survive." Anybody familiar with that song? I need you to survive. The lyrics of that song will break you open when you hear them. The 2 choirs stood side by side, their voices blending when their harmonies were wove into something greater than either group could produce alone. And they sang the lyrics, "I won't harm you with the words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive." And people began to weep. Not only the audience, but the people in the choir were weeping as they were singing this beautiful song. Walls fell. One conservative singer said later, "For the first time I saw the divine in someone I'd been taught to reject." And a gay man from the affirming choir said, "For the first time, I wasn't just tolerated, I was accepted. I felt seen as part of the whole." What a beautiful example of how we can we can allow spiritual practice to bring us to a place where we can see into the humanity of each other. We can come to a place of recognizing the divinity in each other, and all those perceptions and opinions and false ideas that were bred into us by the culture that we came up with, they dissolve in the face of our humanity and in the face of love and acceptance. What that choir did was move from a place of separation and fear to pride in their identity, and then finally shared acceptance of their divinity. They moved through diversity to oneness. So while diversity and oneness seem like two separate ideas, they're actually a pathway to this beautiful principle of oneness that we strive to practice, that we teach, that we try to hold on to. We use this idea of acceptance to affirm our own individual divinity, to see the divinity in all expressions, and then to be conscious activists. And what that means is that we advocate for oneness. And we do that not from fear or anger, but from love informed by truth. And that can look a lot of different ways. And what I know is that as we are moving through this time in our country and in our world where it seems like there's so much dualistic thinking, there's us against them, and I'm right, and differences and actions that are hard to witness. It is this principle of acceptance that will be our guide to what is ours to do, to love each other unconditionally, to accept each other completely, to take action that is yours to take, however that looks for you, so that we can indeed lean into this world that works for everyone. Arpad's talk last week was amazing, wasn't it? He did a great job talking about a world that works for everyone and bringing it together and looking at how we can use our voice, how we can use our individuated power to stand in our truth. We're living in a time where the world desperately needs conscious pride, not the pride that separates, but the pride that transforms into acceptance, where we're not here to tolerate diversity, but we're here to revere it, to care for it, to open ourselves to it, to embrace it. Because no matter what people look like, no matter what their choices are, no matter how they're born, how they love, all of it is God expressing itself towards greater wholeness. There are no exceptions. And so today and throughout this month, my invitation to you is to rise from pride into acceptance, from division into unity, and from identity into divine wholeness. Thank you very much. And so let's pray. I invite you to lower your gaze or close your eyes as I speak these words, knowing that this is a prayer that we can take with us today. That the power and the presence of that one mind, that indivisible wholeness, the oneness of creation that expresses itself in a multitude of diverse ways, is indeed the perfect pattern of life. There is no one way. There are many wells among the river. And so we celebrate all the ways that oneness shows up as individuated authenticity. We celebrate our differences. We celebrate the things we don't understand because they lead us to greater oneness when we lean in, when we allow ourselves to be open to possibility, when we trust the power of knowing each other's humanity is what will open us up to a greater and richer experience of oneness. And so I know for each one that our hearts are opened, our minds are opened, and we move through this week looking for ways to celebrate diversity, to not only recognize the differences, but to see through them to the oneness. To recognize that this indeed is the pathway to greater understanding and a greater divine experience in our livingness. And so it is with great joy that I celebrate. I celebrate life. I celebrate you. I celebrate all the various expressions, knowing that God has no limit, that there are no boundaries, and that we are open to a greater and more evolved experience. And with this, I simply release this from whence it came, from the oneness into creation, trusting its expression, trusting God, trusting the universe as it expresses itself perfectly each and every time. And in celebration and joy, we anchor this prayer by saying together, and so it is.